Let's get to it. Denver Mayor Michael Hancock delivered his annual State of the City address on Monday, in which he addressed many local issues, including Denver's opioid crisis, as well as addressing gentrification in lower-income communities. Hancock also announced that he will officially be running for his third term for mayor next year. Patty, state of the blank addresses are always meant to be somewhat fluffy, and they're not meant to be a whole rollout of policy. But this one's a little bit different because the mayor has not had a rosy time between his last State of the City and this one, and he's coming up of what will likely at least be his most contentious run for mayor next May. What did you make of the State of the City address, of what we heard that will have more of an impact beyond this week?
Well, we're going to hear from a lot of people saying, okay, this is great, but where have you been for the last 7 years? Because it's not like the gentrification problems in Colorado and in Denver happened last week or even since the last State of the City. They've been going on. This has been a trend that was already in place. It was on the edge when Hancock first took office. And that was certainly the most contentious race he's going to have unless someone else jumps in right now, because you had a lot of very involved, smart candidates 7.5 years ago running for mayor, and Chris Romer and James Mejia kind of knocked each other out, and Michael Hancock was the last man standing. But he promised to make systems work smoother. The people I've talked to who are trying to get permits from the city, wastewater, fire, they're having more trouble than they ever have. We talked about DIY spaces 18 months ago and what was going to happen for the artists who were being booted. We still haven't seen those opening. The gentrification issues and the housing, that's been an emphasis for a couple of years, but you still see the tiny villages, which we can't get one to find a permanent spot, or at least a semi-permanent spot, so it doesn't have to move every 6 months. So the economy in Colorado is rosy, but people are still peeved because they can't park in front of their house, they can't get to their house, they can't get to their job, traffic is bad, and then there's the problem that so very many of them can't afford a house here.
David, issues like gentrification and affordable housing, I can certainly see them being problems, issues that the community wants to rally around, but what can, or at least maybe in your view, a city should be doing about what, if those are considered problems in areas of the city?
Well, the opposite of the Hancock agenda in many respects. He's making things worse. One of the things he said in passing in the State of the City was endorsing this bill currently before the City Council by Councilwoman at Large, Robin Kniech, to basically appropriate the property of landlords, including the widow who rents out three apartments in the building she lives in, to say that landlords would have no choice but would have to take Section 8 tenants. That's of the federal housing program for subsidized housing for certain people. The problem is lots of landlords don't want to take Section 8 tenants because, first of all, Section 8 can be very bad on paying. Somebody moves in August, and you may not get the August rent check from the federal government till October or November. Secondly, there's no security deposit required, which of course comes down very hard on landlords whose property is damaged. The large majority of Section 8 tenants are good people, but the federal procedures make it very, very difficult for a landlord, especially a small guy who doesn't have a full-time lawyer on staff, to evict tenants who don't pay their share of the rent, who bring in excessive numbers of people in violation of the lease, or cause other problems for other tenants. So the Denver City Council should be working to try to help landlords mitigate those problems and offering some assistance, which would induce more of them to want Section 8 tenants. But instead, they're just going to cram it down on landlords, which will, in the long run, lead to landlords withdrawing their property from the rental market, selling it to build condos or whatever, and thus worsening the problem.
Scott, on paper, Denver is experiencing fantastic success. It's booming. There's cranes building things everywhere. Neighborhoods that people wouldn't have walked in before are now filled with Starbucks and kombucha bars. I walked around a place in North Denver the same way. My buddies were making fun of that. That seems like a good thing, but that's not good for everybody. How should Mayor Hancock be addressing this, which on paper seems like things are going well?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, this is a time of incredible prosperity, and not everyone is feeling that prosperity. And so those neighborhoods that you're walking in, this is a time of incredible displacement for a number of communities. So, I mean, what I found really striking reading the State of the City was just the mayor seems to really clearly understand what all the problems are. And it was almost like this sort of 101 roadmap of the politics of Denver. And he pointed each of the problems I agree with Patty that's like kind of where have you been? But I think, to me, I think he laid out a vision. He understands what the challenges are. Now the question is implementation. Can he get the job done? Can he find the right people? And in a city political environment, that can be very difficult. So I just think it's striking that he knows exactly where his opposition is coming from. And so he sort of laid it all out. I think what's interesting is that his opposition can't unify because it's so many different issues that they have with him, and he may very well benefit from that disunity.
Brother Jeff, what do you think? I mean, we're here taping this show in the historic Five Points neighborhood. In one way, it really symbolizes some of the issues that Mayor Hancock is facing. It's an historic neighborhood, historically African American, but faced its own economic issues, and now my fellow colleagues and I think about it would be great to live down here, but none of us could afford it. We work at a nonprofit TV station, for goodness sake. So what do you think about what we heard from the state of the city and where Mayor Hancock has to go before he runs for his third term?
Well, you know, first I got to start with this caveat by saying I like Mike. It's difficult as a black man to say things when your city government is led by black people. And so sometimes they take that criticism as an attack, as opposed to hearing the voice of citizens and how their policies are affecting them. I listened to his address and I put it in two categories, actual versus aspirational. Every time he said equity, I put that in the aspirational category. It's a great catchphrase. And listening to him say, I grew up in 5 Points, the first thing that I thought was, as the head of this city, you're building a city that even the mayor probably can't afford to live in the neighborhood that he says that he grew up in. It was very interesting to see the optics of that part of the conversation because he stood up a couple of aspiring business people that are very well respected, but they're not major landholders or major monetary players. It would have been interesting if he honestly stood up Paul Books and said, this is who purchased the Rossonian, this is who purchased the Lydian, this is who purchased the Public Realty, and this is who purchased the pedal shop. This is the new face of 5 Points. But if he wanted to bring up a historic face, it would have been Dr. Renee Cousins, who's a major landowner and business person in her own right. It was interesting to see that she was absent from that presentation. So the optics kind of looked like 5 Points was a historic black neighborhood. Here's some black leaders and everything's moving along fine. But the reality is this community is getting more upscale, more white, and more displacement every single day. That's the reality of 5 Points.